El Nino, that's the word that has got markets and farmers, economists, everyone worried. Change in weather patterns after 3 years of La Nina has triggered panic that agricultural produce could be impacted, and so will India's rural demand. The effects of the weather change could also affect India's fight against food inflation, which could be impacted by prolonged periods of heat waves, droughts, and lower yields. Now, that's the part which we're all worried about, but the fact is that the heat wave seems to be already here. It's one of the hottest Februaries on record. In fact, the IMD today is saying that the maximum temperatures in February have been the highest since 1901, and markets are also feeling that heat. The IMD, in fact, also predicted that most pockets of the country will face above maximum average temperatures between March and May. So what is going to be the impact of this heat wave on the economy? We're talking about that today, but first, let's listen in to what the IMD has said.
The maximum temperature, if you see the top left panel and the bottom left, is the anomaly of maximum temperature. Many parts of northwest India and central India observed anomalously high temperature in the range of 3 to 6 degrees Celsius. Some parts of East Central India got temperature 5 to 6 degrees Celsius on an average for the entire month. La Nina conditions are prevailing in different parts of the country. Nino 3.4, which is minus 0.5, just as the margin of La Nina and neutral conditions. So they are still prevailing. But if you see on the right-hand side, heating has been going on. The regions are different regions. So from December to February have warmed. And the forecast suggests that, if you come to the forecast, during the early summer of 2023, neutral La Nina to neutral ENSO conditions are likely to emerge as the season progresses.
On this, I'm joined today by Prithviraj Srinivas, Chief Economist at Axis Capital, Mahesh Palawat, VP at Skymet, and Madhavi Arora, Lead Economist at Emkay Global. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us. Mr. Palawat, I want to get your view first on what we're exactly seeing and these concerns of a heat wave.
See, we have seen the hottest February on record now, and during 2022, the December was also hottest on record. So now we see that temperatures are increasing year by year, and global warming and climate change is taking its effect. And the forecast for March, April, and May in pre-monsoon season seems to be, we can say, the above normal temperatures will prevail over many parts of central India, East India, Northeast India, and central parts of the country, particularly over South Rajasthan, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, all these areas. And heat wave has already started over parts of Gujarat and South Rajasthan, as well as over Vidarbha. So the above normal temperature will continue throughout the season, and the South Peninsula, particularly Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and parts of Kerala and Karnataka, may receive a few showers, because last year also during March we have seen 2 deep depressions developing over Bay of Bengal, and they have given rain over Tamil Nadu and adjoining areas. However, second deep depression moved towards Myanmar, and the heat wave will persist for longer duration than usual, and April and May seems to be much hotter than normal. Yeah.
Mr. Palawat, what is this telling us about the upcoming monsoon? Because that's a very important factor. And this entire El Nino, point that we're talking about, are we looking at extended periods of lower than expected rainfall and the fear of droughts?
Last 3 years were La Nina, and now we are moving into ENSO neutral condition, and gradually evolving El Nino will develop by the beginning of monsoon during June, July, August, and September. And during last 50 years, during El Nino years, we have seen 80% chances of below normal, and among these 80%, 60% chances of drought over many parts of the country. So evolving El Nino is going to be there, and we forecast that as of now we have not come out with the monsoon forecast. It will be in the month of April, because spring barrier is there, but indications are there that yes, below normal monsoon will be there in 2023.
So we're seeing a possible below normal monsoon. That's not great news. The El Nino factor is already, hovering on the horizon. That's impacted markets as well. But why is that? Because there are fears of what this will do for the economy. Prithviraj, Srinivas, also with us today on the show. Mr. Srinivas, how do you look at these weather patterns and their economic impact? Because there's so many angles to this. The news usually covers this in terms of what a heat wave means for people, impact on health, climate change, etc. But it also has a big impact on the economy, isn't it?
Yes, it does. Thanks, Tamanna. Good evening, and thank you for having me here. So yes, obviously, I mean, if we have an extended heat wave and obviously concerns about an El Nino, it will have an impact on agricultural production for sure. For the last couple of years, we've been blessed with good rains, and it's obviously seen through higher agricultural output as well as prices. So in that sense, you should sort of expect that agricultural growth will be weaker than what we're currently projecting, and weaker than what we've seen over the last couple of years. The other aspect is from an inflation angle. In the past, when we've had in El Nino years, at least in the recent past, we've seen that inflation is more of an inter-year phenomena where you have very high fresh food prices during this dry seasons, and then it tends to catch up. So over a course of year, you do see spikes, volatility in vegetable prices, but then it seems to correct. But on average, it does tend to sort of push up inflation a bit and weaker sort of agricultural realizations and income. And that's the impact is what we see. But of course, there are certain sectors that benefit as well. So there are certain consumer durables as well as FMCG where you should see a spike in activity.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking possibly about, companies selling air conditioners, coolers, fans, etc. But, I was seeing this data point, less than 10% of Indians actually have access to ways of cooling. Most don't. And it might be difficult to air condition our way out of this as an economy. Madhavi, Arora, are the biggest concerns there actually on what the impact will be for rural India?
Yes, so as Prithviraj rightly said, we're already sort of grappling with very high food inflation, which is led by cereals and protein. Now, potentially adverse climate conditions are posing a fresh threat to India agri output. I mean, we, as Sir mentioned, that heat waves are now building up just like last year. And last year we saw the wheat production, actually lower by around 3% or so. This year around, the hope is that we probably would have a record wheat production of around 112 MMT, which I think would be at risk of the same grade as we saw last year. And this comes on the back of a decently high demand and relatively low buffer stock. In fact, the current wheat buffer stock, if I see, is well below the long-term average, and in fact is 6-year low. So even adjusting for the so-called buffer, I think we'll still be left with a very tight demand supply dynamics on the cereal inflation, and I think that is what we are seeing. We're seeing a wheat inflation running around 20% plus, flour inflation again 20% plus, and which is what is essentially feeding into other commodities as well, and to a large extent is also visible in products like fodder, which is driving up prices of milk and meat, etc. So I think the broad-based food inflation fear, barring the vegetables one, is something which could be a worry in the coming few months or so. And of course, if El Nino turns out to be the case, and historically in the last 20 years, what we've seen is that every drought has been basically an El Nino year. Last 5 El Ninos have converted into almost 4 droughts in the last 20 years, which basically means that you are going to be seeing a hit on the agriculture production. And this comes on the back of already low rural incomes that we have seen in the last 3 years or so on a real basis. Real rural wages, both agri and non-agri, have been hovering close to +2, -2% kind of a range. And, this would not augur well for the rural demand in general. So I think we probably are in for a relatively more sanguine rural consumption demand if El Nino turns out to be the case. And of course, it will also come at a much higher inflation, which will again hit disposable income.
Absolutely, and you're looking at the GDP data that has come out today for Q3. That was before all of this El Nino concern, and that's already showing some kind of tempering. So that's definitely not a good sign. I want to get a little more clarity on this El Nino, and I'm going back to Mahesh Palawat on that. Is there still an if as far as El Nino is concerned, or is it clear that this is an impact that we're going to see? Can you also take a minute, Mr. Palawat, to explain what is this phenomena and why is it of so much concern?
See, Tamanna, this El Nino is the warming of equatorial sea surface temperature over Eastern Pacific when it is warming up over that area. So Peru and South America receives average rainfall and Western Pacific cools down. But banking on one more weather factor, which is Indian Ocean dipole. In 2019, we have seen the strongest El Nino. It was nullified by one of the strongest IOD, Indian Ocean dipole. So during that year, we have seen above average rainfall, and this year also indications are there that by July, the Indian Ocean dipole will move towards positive. But we have to wait and see up until April because we are at the spring barrier as of now, and models are not very accurate. So there may be some changes in the pattern of El Nino as well as Indian Ocean dipole. If it turns out to be positive Indian Ocean dipole, then the impact of El Nino will be minimized, and we can see a normal rainfall also. So we are banking on it, and we have to wait for another 1 month.
So, we have to wait and see what the full impact of El Nino is going to be. But Madhavi, the concern continues. I refer to the GDP data that came in. It already showed a slowdown in consumption as part of the impact, and the reason for that 4.4. Of course, it's also base effect, etc., as the chief economic advisor has said. But Q3 is usually the higher consumption period, right, with festive season, etc. And is that going to be a continuing concern? Your take on the GDP data we've seen as well.
So I think GDP numbers, have seen like revision for the last 3 years or so. It's not necessarily right to assume that, the numbers that you're seeing is showing you a secular demand deceleration. But I think in general, if I see on an annualized basis, consumption has been a missing agent in the economic growth story. And I think that could probably be continuing in FY24 as well, because I think to a large extent, consumption is a function of income, right? If you're looking at a sustained consumption story, as I said, rural incomes have been on a real basis in a plus to minus to kind of a range, while urban consumption was quite varied, where you saw actually a much more divided income distribution in certain sectors, especially in formal sector and within formal sector in IT and BFSI. I think that would correct as you go ahead into the next year. And my sense is that both urban and rural employment will also probably feel the pinch of it. And you should see, some kind of a demand curbing behavior, which is also probably becoming owing to the transmission of monetary policies, rate hikes. So I think policy support from fiscal side is also sort of constrained as you go ahead. So I think consumption continues to be a laggard. It used to be a bellwether of Indian economy, for a longest period after we sort of saw investment, fading in terms of its contribution to GDP. Since 2018, I think consumption is a missing agent, and I don't think that we are going to see that change in FY24 either.
Mr. Srinivas, your take on the Q3 numbers, which frankly have been lower than estimates, and then you have now the concerns of a heat wave also disturbing economic growth.
Is that for me?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously our view is that, consumption has been weaker than expected in the December quarter. But when you look at data on a sequential basis, I mean, December quarter has improved. You can see that activity levels across sectors, there is an improvement. Of course, it has not improved to the extent that we expected, but you do see that activity has sort of picked up pace. Looking ahead, our sense is that, you've seen nominal GDP growth sort of slow to about 11% right now. And it's a split between 4.5% real and 6.5% inflation. And what we sort of expect will happen is that you maintain the same 11% nominal growth, but the roles would get switched, right? So you sort of, as firms pass on the fall in input costs, particularly international commodity prices, to consumers, you will see volume pickup. So real growth sort of gradually improves towards the 6.5%, and inflation sort of comes off towards the 4.5-5% range. So that's the story that we sort of expect to play out, that, inflation will cool, firms will sort of pass on some of these input cost declines to consumers, and that's how the real incomes improve. And as far as rural incomes are concerned, yes, agriculture would be weaker than what we've seen over the last couple of years, but there are other legs to rural where you do see improvement. One of them, of course, is urbanization and the fact that services sector activity has been extremely robust. Job creation in the in urban India is definitely well above pre-COVID levels, and all of these households who have had jobs and incomes over the last couple of years are likely to leverage up, right? Which means urbanization is definitely going to sort of pick up pace and attract a lot of that labor out of rural India. Government budget also sort of more focused on construction, be it in roads, in railways, or even in all those libraries, as well as malls that are going to get built in every district. So it's going to be construction focused. It's so, which means that labor that is there in rural India is going to the labor markets are going to tighten. You can already see that rural wages are picking up, particularly on the agricultural side, but yes, even other sectors will also pick up. So we believe that both from tightening of labor supply as well as fall in inflation, real incomes will improve, and therefore the pace of activity and the pace of consumption improvement is going to improve. But of course, to what extent is anybody's guess at this point in time, but we are certainly looking at at growth sort of improving to about 6% odd pace by the next year.
I just want to come back to another aspect of this heat wave concern that we have not quite covered. And Madhavi, let me come to you on that. On the increase in power consumption that we will need. And we have seen consecutive years of a few months of coal shortages coming in. Is that another aspect that we need to focus and prepare for as an economy?
Yes, I think you raised a very pertinent points. In fact, if we look at the FY24 estimate, there appears to be a record demand expected for power in FY24. Clearly, if we have a lower rainfall, we'll have lower hydropower generation, which essentially will imply that you would probably have higher coal usage, and of course it will impact your trade numbers again. In fact, last year, apart from oil, other energy imports were also a pain as far as the trade deficit is concerned. So I think this will only add further to the current pain with regard to the very record high demand for power, which is expected for the year, and a low rainfall, which essentially implies that probably you will need more coal usage for the year. So I think it will just lead to a vicious cycle wherein your trade dynamics could get a little complicated. And of course, you also would need, given the fact that the water reservoir levels at this point are still comfortable, but they're still, much lower than the long-term average, which means that in case we really have a, very bad drought year, the next year's Rabi crop will be, at a risk, and that would also imply that, probably for higher, there will be a higher demand for power as far as irrigation is concerned. So overall, I think all of this could probably lead to a very difficult, vicious cycle as far as our external sector demands are concerned. So I think that bit also has to be taken into account.
Absolutely. The heat wave has more impact than just on your health. Of course, there's a health warning also that has been issued. So please take care of yourself. But it's going to be quite scathing for the economy as well. Thank you to all of you for joining us on the show today.
Thank you.